What if I told you that a waitress with a worn notebook and a broken heart saved thousands of children at 4 in the morning? What if I told you that a man who lost everything in a single night found his miracle in the last place he'd ever look? This is the true story of two strangers who met in a small diner when hope was running out. A mother who couldn't help her own deaf daughter until a desperate man walked through her door with tears streaming down his face and his dreams slipping through his fingers. Stay with me, because what happens next will prove to you that miracles don't come from the sky. They come from ordinary people who show up at exactly the right moment, in the darkest hour, when everything seems lost. And I promise you, by the end of the story, you'll never look at a coffee shop the same way again. You'll never look at a stranger the same way again. Because sometimes, the person sitting next to you might be the answer to a prayer you didn't even know you were praying. This is the story of how one lost file changed the world. This is the story of hope found at midnight. Let me tell you what happened. Welcome to the story room. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Section 1. When everything falls apart, 1,000 words. Have you ever had one of those nights where everything you've worked for just crumbles? Where all your dreams, all those late nights, all that hope, it all just disappears right before your eyes. Have you ever had one of those nights where everything you've worked for just crumbles? Where all your dreams, all those late nights, all that hope, it all just disappears right before your eyes. That's what happened to James. James was 39 years old. He lived in Seattle, and for the past 8 years, he'd been building something he believed in with all his heart. You see, James ran a small company that created special hearing devices for deaf children. But these weren't ordinary hearing aids. No, these were smart devices that could help children hear and understand speech in ways that traditional hearing aids couldn't. Why did James care so much about this? Because his little sister, Rebecca, was born deaf. James grew up watching her struggle. He saw the loneliness in her eyes when other kids talked and laughed, and she couldn't join in. He remembered how she'd cry because she felt left out, invisible, like the world was having a party she wasn't invited to. So when James grew up and learned about technology, he made himself a promise. He would help children like Rebecca. He would make sure no child ever felt that alone again. Tonight was supposed to be special. Tomorrow morning, James had a meeting with the Global Health Foundation. They were one of the biggest medical foundations in the world. If they agreed to fund his project, his hearing devices would go to children in 50 countries. 50 countries. Thousands of deaf children would finally be able to hear their mother's voice, their teacher's lessons, their friends' laughter. But right now, sitting in his small office in downtown Seattle, James felt like his world was ending. The presentation was gone. Just gone. 8 years of work. Every graph, every video, every carefully written word that would convince the foundation to say yes. All of it had vanished from his computer. He'd tried everything. Called his computer expert. Searched every backup. Nothing worked. The file was destroyed, and he'd accidentally deleted his only backup just 2 hours ago when he was too tired to think straight. The meeting was in 6 hours. 6 hours to recreate 8 years of work. James wasn't the type to give up easily. But tonight, alone in that quiet office, he felt tears running down his face. This wasn't just about business anymore. This wasn't about success or money or proving himself. Last month, he'd visited a school for deaf children in Portland. There was a little boy there, maybe 7 years old, named Tommy. Tommy had touched James's face, trying to understand what he was saying by feeling the vibrations. And then Tommy had signed to his teacher, asking a question. The teacher translated. He wants to know if you can really make a device that will let him hear his mom say, "I love you." James had promised Tommy yes. He'd promised that little boy, and now he was going to break that promise. He thought about calling the foundation and canceling. But they'd flown in board members from 5 different countries just for this meeting. They'd cleared their busy schedules. If he canceled now, they'd never give him another chance. And there were other companies developing similar technology. Every day he waited, more children lived in silence. James stood up and walked to the window. Seattle stretched out below him, lights glowing in the rainy darkness. Somewhere out there, Children were going to bed in a silent world. Parents were tucking in their kids, wishing desperately they could communicate better, share more, connect deeper. He remembered something his grandmother used to tell him when he was young. "James," she'd say in her soft voice, "sometimes when we're lost, that's exactly when we need to stop trying so hard and let the universe guide us." James grabbed his jacket and his car keys. He couldn't stay here anymore. Maybe a drive would help. Maybe some fresh air would clear his mind. Maybe nothing would help, but he had to try. The elevator ride down felt like forever. The parking garage was cold and wet, rain dripping through the concrete levels. As he sat in his car with the key in his hand, he realized he had no idea where to go. He just needed to move, to breathe, to be anywhere but here. He started driving with no plan, just following the streets wherever they led. The city looked different at night. Quieter. More honest. During the day, everyone's rushing around, pretending they have it all together. But at night, you can see the truth. The small coffee shops still open. The dim streetlights. The ordinary places where ordinary people live their real lives. James didn't believe in fate. He believed in hard work and determination and building something meaningful through your own sweat and tears. But sometimes, don't you think life has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be? He was about to discover that miracles don't look the way we expect. Sometimes they look like a small diner on a rainy corner. Sometimes they wear an apron and ask if you want more coffee. Sometimes the answer to our most desperate prayers comes from the most unexpected person at the most impossible time. And sometimes, when we're at our lowest point, that's exactly when we're ready to receive the help we never knew we needed. Have you ever walked into a place and felt like you could finally breathe again? That's what happened when James spotted the little diner on the corner of Pike Street and Harbor Avenue. Rosie's Diner wasn't fancy. It was the kind of place that had been there for 40 years, with cracked red leather booths and a counter that had seen better days. But warm yellow light poured through the foggy windows, cutting through the cold Seattle rain, and James found himself parking without really deciding to. The door made a soft bell sound as he walked in. The smell of fresh coffee and apple pie wrapped around him like his grandmother's hug. There were only a few people inside. An old man doing a crossword puzzle in the corner booth. A young couple sharing French fries and whispering to each other. And behind the counter, a woman who looked to be in her mid-40s, with kind eyes and dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Her name tag," said Ruth. When she looked up at James, she didn't just glance. She really saw him. You know what I mean? Not the polite look people give at work, but a real, genuine look that says, "I see you're hurting." "Coffee, honey?" she asked. Her voice was warm, like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Yes, please," James said, sliding onto a counter stool. He felt so tired, he could barely sit up straight. "Actually, make it a large. I'm not sleeping tonight anyway." Ruth studied his face as she poured the coffee. James had the strange feeling she could read everything he was feeling just by looking at him. "Rough night?" she asked gently. James let out a laugh that had no joy in it. "You could say that. I just lost the most important presentation of my life. 8 years of work, gone. And I have to present it to a medical foundation tomorrow morning." He paused, surprised at himself. He never talked about his problems with strangers. He was the boss, the one who always had answers. But something about this quiet diner and this kind woman made him feel safe enough to be honest. "I'm sorry," he added quickly. "You probably don't want to hear about my disasters." Ruth set the coffee cup down in front of him and leaned against the counter. "Sweetheart, people have been bringing their troubles to diners since diners were invented. That's what we're here for. Tell me about this presentation. What was it about?" There was something in her voice that made James actually look at her. Really look. She wasn't just being polite. She genuinely cared. "It's a hearing device," he said slowly. "For deaf children. Kids who live in a silent world and feel left out and alone. The device helps them hear and understand speech in ways regular hearing aids can't. It adapts to each child's specific type of hearing loss." Ruth's hand stopped moving. Her eyes went wide, and James saw something shift in her face.
Pain.
Recognition. Understanding. "Hearing devices," she repeated softly. You're developing something to help deaf children hear.
Yes.
Do you know about this? Ruth's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. When she spoke, her voice shook. My daughter, Lily. She's 11 years old. She's been deaf since she was born. The world seemed to stop. Of all the diners in Seattle, of all the people James could have met tonight, he'd walked into the one place where someone understood exactly why his lost presentation mattered so desperately. If this story is touching your heart, please stay with me. What happens next will show you how two broken people can help each other heal. Ruth took a deep breath and continued. Lily is the smartest, funniest, most creative kid you'll ever meet. She can paint anything. She understands people's feelings just by watching their faces. She's kind and brave and strong. But every single day, I watch her struggle. She tries so hard to lip read, but she misses things. She gets frustrated. Other kids don't know how to talk to her, so they just don't. She eats lunch alone most days, James. 11 years old, and she's so lonely it breaks my heart. James felt his throat tighten. He knew that loneliness. He'd watched his sister Rebecca live it. The school tries to help, Ruth went on, wiping her eyes with a napkin. She has a sign language interpreter, but it's not enough. She's starting to pull away from the world, James. I can see it happening. She's starting to believe she'll always be on the outside looking in, and I don't know how to convince her otherwise. She's not on the outside, James said firmly. She's just experiencing the world differently. That's not a weakness, Ruth. It's just different. I know that. You know that. But try telling that to an 11-year-old girl who watches other kids laugh at jokes she can't hear, who sees her younger brother chatting with his friends while she sits alone. Ruth poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down on the stool next to James. You said you lost your presentation. Tell me about the device. What does it do exactly? Maybe talking it through will help you remember the important parts. James looked at her uncertainly. Ruth, it's really technical. There's data about sound frequencies and neural processing and speech recognition algorithms. She held up her hand and smiled, though her eyes were still sad. Honey, when your child is deaf, you become an expert real fast. I've read every article, talked to every doctor, tried every device on the market.
Trust me.
I'll understand. And so James started talking. Have you ever met someone and felt like maybe you were supposed to meet them all along? Like some invisible thread had been pulling you both to the same place at the same time? For the next 2 hours, James talked while Ruth listened. And she didn't just listen politely. She asked smart questions that showed she understood more than most doctors did. She brought him refill after refill of coffee and a slice of homemade cherry pie, treating him less like a customer and more like a friend who desperately needed help. The other customers gradually left. The old man finished his crossword and waved goodnight. The young couple paid their bill and headed home. But James and Ruth barely noticed. They were deep in conversation about sound waves, hearing loss patterns, and the specific ways deaf children's brains process information differently. The breakthrough, James explained, drawing rough sketches on napkins, came when we stopped trying to make deaf children hear like everyone else. Instead, we let the device adapt to their unique hearing pattern. Some kids hear bass sounds better. Some pick up high-pitched tones. Some need background noise filtered out. The device figures out what works for each individual child and adjusts automatically. Ruth nodded thoughtfully, like finding the right key for the right lock. You're not changing the lock. You're just finding what opens it. Exactly. James felt a surge of energy, despite his exhaustion. That's exactly it. You just explained in one sentence what took me 5 paragraphs to say in the presentation. Ruth smiled, but then her face grew serious. James, I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to think I'm overstepping or being weird. What is it? She stood up and walked to a shelf behind the counter, pulling down a worn notebook. When she came back and opened it, James's eyes went wide. The pages were filled with beautiful drawings, medical diagrams, charts showing hearing improvement, visual representations of sound waves and how they travel. All done in careful artistic detail with notes written in neat handwriting. Before I opened this diner, Ruth said quietly, I was a medical illustrator. I worked with hospitals and research centers to create visual materials that helped explain complex medical concepts to patients and families. I specialized in hearing and speech disorders because... She paused, her voice catching. Because when Lily was diagnosed, I needed to understand everything. I needed to know how to help her. James stared at her, his mind racing. You're a medical illustrator? I was. I gave it up 6 years ago when my husband left us. I needed something stable, something with regular hours so I could take care of Lily. I used my savings to buy this diner. It pays the bills and lets me be there for my daughter. She looked down at her notebook. But I never lost the skills. And I never stopped learning about hearing loss and how to help kids like her. James felt something shift inside his chest. It was like the universe had reached down and placed exactly the right person in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. Ruth, he said slowly, what if I told you that you've already helped me remember most of my presentation? And what if I asked, would you be willing to help me recreate it? Not just the information, but the visual parts too. Ruth looked at him for a long moment, and James saw something light up in her eyes.
Hope. Purpose.
The chance to use her gifts to help not just her own daughter, but thousands of children like her. How much time do we have? She asked. James checked his watch. 4 hours until I need to leave for the meeting. Then we'd better get started. What happened over the next hours was something James would remember for the rest of his life. Ruth flipped to a fresh page in her notebook and began to draw. Her hands moved with confidence, like someone returning to work they loved, work they were born to do. She didn't just recreate his charts and diagrams. She made them better. She understood both the medical side and the human side. And she brought them together in ways that would make people not just understand the device, but feel why it mattered. This graph showing hearing improvement, she said, sketching quickly, needs to include actual quotes from children. Numbers are important, but stories change hearts. This diagram of how the device processes sound, she continued, adding color and detail, should show a child's face. Remind them that we're talking about real kids, not just technology. James watched in amazement as his presentation came back to life. But it wasn't just being recreated. It was being transformed into something more powerful than what he'd lost. Ruth brought a perspective he'd never had. She knew what it felt like to be the parent of a deaf child. She knew what families needed to hear. She knew how to make the science feel human and the hope feel real. They worked through the night, barely noticing as the hours slipped by. Ruth drew while James provided the technical details and research data. He told her about the test programs, the success stories, the children whose lives had already been changed. She turned each fact into a visual story that would touch hearts as well as minds. Around 4 a.m, Ruth paused and looked at what they created. 32 hand-drawn pages, each one a perfect blend of scientific accuracy and emotional heart. You know what Lily told me last week? She said softly. She said she wishes she'd never been born. 11 years old, and she's already given up hope. But if this device gets approved... Her voice broke. If this goes worldwide, maybe she'll have a chance. Maybe she'll finally be able to hear my voice telling her I love her. James felt tears in his own eyes. Have you ever walked into a room knowing that the next few hours would change everything? That's how James felt as he entered the conference room at the Global Health Foundation headquarters. He'd gone home for a quick shower and change of clothes, but his mind was still back at Rosie's diner with Ruth and her beautiful drawings. He'd carefully placed each hand-drawn page in a presentation folder. And now, standing before 15 of the most influential medical experts in the world, he felt his heart pounding like a drum. The board members looked exactly like what you'd expect. Serious faces, expensive suits, tablets and laptops open in front of them. They'd seen thousands of presentations promising to change the world. They'd learned to be careful, to be skeptical. Dr. Patricia Anderson, the foundation chairwoman, gave him a polite but cool smile. Mr. James Walker, we've been looking forward to seeing your adaptive hearing device. We understand you've been developing it for 8 years. Please begin when you're ready. James took a deep breath. This was it. Everything came down to this moment. Thank you for being here, he began. I know you were expecting a standard digital presentation with slides and videos. What I'm about to show you is different. Last night, I lost my entire presentation file. 8 years of work gone. But sometimes when we lose what we think we need, we find something better. He saw a few board members exchange glances. They probably thought he was making excuses for being unprepared. Last night, James continued, I met a woman named Ruth. She runs a small diner here in Seattle, and she has an 11-year-old daughter who is born deaf. When I told her about my device, she didn't just listen politely. She understood because she lives this reality every single day. And then she did something extraordinary. James opened the folder and held up the first drawing. It was a portrait of a child's face, split down the middle. On one side, loneliness and isolation. On the other, connection and joy. Below it, Ruth had written in beautiful script, same child, different world. The room went completely silent. Every board member leaned forward to see better. For the next 90 minutes, James took them through the entire device using Ruth's artwork. Each page told a story. Each diagram showed not just data, but the human reality behind that data. Ruth had included actual quotes from deaf children in test programs. She'd drawn before and after scenarios that made the improvement feel real and tangible. But what really moved the room was how Ruth had illustrated the core concept. She'd drawn a series of windows, each one showing a different view. Some were clear, some were foggy, some were cracked, some were colored. Above them all, she'd written, every child deserves to see the world clearly. They just need the right window. James explained the technology, the research, the neural science behind the device. But Ruth's drawings made it mean something. They made it matter. You could see it on the board members' faces. This wasn't just another medical technology pitch. This was about real children who were struggling right now, today, in silence. When James reached the final page, there was a drawing of a young girl standing alone in a crowded playground. Other children were playing around her, but she stood apart, watching. Above the drawing, Ruth had written in her daughter's handwriting, I wish I could hear what happy sounds like. James's voice caught as he read those words aloud. That was written by Lily, the daughter of the woman who helped me create this presentation. She's 11 years old. She was born deaf. And every day, she feels left out of a world she desperately wants to be part of. But she's not alone. There are millions of children just like her, all around the world, waiting for us to help them. They don't need pity. They need tools. They need technology that meets them where they are. The room was so quiet you could hear the rain hitting the windows outside. Dr. Anderson cleared her throat. James couldn't read her expression. Was she moved? Was she convinced? He had no idea. Mr. Walker, she said finally, in 25 years of reviewing medical technology, I have never seen a presentation like this. The science is solid. Your research is thorough. Your device shows real promise. But what makes this special is that you've shown us the heart behind the technology. You've reminded us why we're all here in the first place. She looked around at the other board members. Several of them were nodding. One man was wiping his eyes. I'd like to propose something unusual, Dr. Anderson continued. Normally, we take several months to review and discuss before making a funding decision. But I think we all know that children like Lily don't have time to waste. I'd like to call for a preliminary vote right now. We can work out the details later. But I want to know if this board is ready to approve full funding for worldwide distribution of this device. James's heart was hammering so hard, he thought everyone could hear it. One by one, the board members raised their hands. All 15 of them. Unanimous approval. Dr. Anderson smiled, and this time it was warm and genuine. Mr. Walker, congratulations. Your device will begin rolling out to 50 countries within 1 year. We'll start with areas that have the highest populations of deaf children and the fewest resources. And Mr. Walker, please thank Ruth for us. Her artwork didn't just illustrate your device. It reminded all of us why we chose to work in medicine in the first place. James could barely speak. I will. Thank you. Thank you all so much. You know what I've learned? The best stories don't really end. They just keep growing, spreading out like ripples in water, touching more lives than we ever imagined possible. 6 months after that presentation, James stood in a community center in a small neighborhood in South Seattle. It was the official launch day for the hearing device program, and 300 deaf children and their families had gathered to be among the first to receive the devices. But James wasn't alone at the front of that room. Standing beside him was Ruth, and next to her was Lily. James had insisted that Ruth be part of the launch. She'd done more than help him recreate a presentation. She'd transformed it into something that could change hearts as well as minds. And she'd done it because she understood from the inside what these families were going through. "I want to introduce you to someone very special," James said to the crowd. "This is Ruth. 6 months ago, I walked into her diner at the worst moment of my life. I'd lost everything I'd worked for, and I had no idea how to fix it. Ruth didn't just help me. She reminded me why this device matters. Because it's not about technology or business or success. It's about children who deserve every chance to be part of the world around them." The families applauded, but James could see some of them were confused. They didn't understand yet. "Ruth has a daughter named Lily," James continued. "Lily, would you come up here?" Lily walked to the front, and James could see she was nervous. She was wearing one of the new devices in her ear. But there was something else in her eyes now. Something that hadn't been there 6 months ago.
Hope.
"Lily," James said gently, speaking slowly, so she could hear him clearly through the device. "Do you remember what you told your mom a few months ago?" Lily nodded. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "I told her I wished I'd never been born. I thought being deaf meant I would always be alone." She looked out at all the families watching her. James could see children of all ages, some confident, some shy, but all of them carrying that same weight of feeling different, feeling left out. "But now," Lily said, and her voice grew stronger, "now I know that's not true. I got to be one of the first kids to test Mr. James's device. And for the first time my whole life, I can hear my mom's voice. I can hear my teacher without having to watch her lips the whole time. I can hear music. Real music. And it's the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced." A woman in the third row started crying. Her son, who looked about Lily's age, reached over and squeezed her hand. Ruth stepped forward. "I spent years watching my daughter struggle. I spent years feeling helpless, wondering if there was anything I could do to help her connect with the world. And then one night, a desperate man walked into my diner at 4 a.m. And somehow, in helping him, I helped my own daughter. I helped all of our daughters and sons." She held up her old notebook. These drawings that helped launch this device, they weren't just about medicine or science. They were about hope. They were about believing that our children deserve every opportunity to hear the world around them, to be part of conversations, to never feel alone again. James watched as families came forward to receive their devices. He watched children's faces light up as they heard sounds clearly for the first time. He watched parents cry tears of joy as they saw their kids' eyes widen with wonder. He watched families hug each other, overwhelmed with gratitude and hope. But the moment that meant the most came later that evening. James and Ruth were packing up equipment when a little boy, maybe 6 years old, tugged on Ruth's sleeve. He was wearing one of the new devices. "Miss Ruth," he said, his words a bit unclear but understandable. "Is it true? Can I really keep this?" Ruth knelt down to his level. "Yes, sweetheart. It's yours to keep. Forever. Forever." The little boy's eyes filled with tears. "I heard my dad say I love you today. I never heard that before. I only saw him say it. But today I heard it. And it was..." He struggled to find the words. "It was the best sound ever." Ruth pulled him into a hug, and James had to turn away because his own eyes were filling with tears. As they walked to their cars later that night, Ruth turned to James. "You know what's amazing? That little boy isn't going to remember this as the day some company gave out hearing devices. He's going to remember it as the day he heard his father say, 'I love you.'" James nodded. "That's what matters most, isn't it? Not the technology or the business success. The moment when a child realizes they're not broken, they're not less than anyone else. They're just different. And different is okay. Over the next year, James's hearing devices reached more than 50 countries. Hundreds of thousands of deaf children got access to sound in ways they never had before. Lives changed. Families healed. Children who'd felt alone finally felt connected. James kept Ruth's original drawings framed in his office. But more than that, he hired her as the company's director of family services, because who better to help struggling families than someone who had walked that road herself? And Lily? She started a blog teaching other deaf kids that they weren't alone, that being deaf didn't mean being less, that they were worthy of love and connection and every good thing in life. Sometimes I think about that night in Rosie's diner. One man desperate for help. One woman with the skills to give it. Both of them brought together by desperation and maybe something bigger than both of them. That's what I want you to remember from this story. When everything falls apart, when all your plans crumble, when you feel most alone and helpless, that's often exactly when miracles happen. But they don't look like lightning from the sky. They look like kind strangers in diners. They look like skills you forgot you had. They look like two hurting people helping each other heal. Ruth didn't just help James save his presentation that night. She helped him remember why it mattered. And in doing so, she found her own purpose again too. The most beautiful part? They're still working together, still helping families, still reminding children that different doesn't mean broken. Because that's what real miracles do. They don't just fix one problem. They ripple outward, touching more lives than we can count, healing wounds we didn't even know needed healing. If this story touched your heart, I hope you'll remember that you have the power to be someone's miracle too. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday, somewhere, someone will desperately need exactly what you have to offer. And when that moment comes, I hope you'll have the courage to say yes. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for believing that kindness matters and that help can come from the most unexpected places. Now go out there and be someone's Ruth. Be someone's James. Be the person who shows up at exactly the right moment and changes everything. Because that's how we change the world. One diner conversation at a time. One hand-drawn picture at a time. One child who finally feels connected at a time. That's how miracles work. They start small. They start with caring. They start with showing up. And they change absolutely everything.